Yeah, baby, it's another episode of Build People Up. And you know what? I have some special guests today. So I got some friends from the Do Hard Things community on with me today because they just did a recent witnessing trip a couple weeks ago now after just scheduling this and constantly rescheduling it until everything can work again. But I got a couple of friends with me today. So I got Clayton Hill and Stephen with me today. So I just want the audience to know about y'all and who you guys are. So who wants to go first? So
Clayton, I will let you go first, my friend.
Okay, sounds good. So, like you said, I'm Clayton. I live in Missouri, and I've been a Christian for 4 years. And around about the same time that I became a Christian, I first started evangelizing. It hasn't been the most consistent thing in my life, but it has been something I've tried to grow in, whether it be taking apologetics classes in high school, reading books, watching videos from Ray Comfort, going to a recent witnessing event, practicing on the streets. Lots of different things to try and grow in that area. But yep, I'm 18, almost 19, and excited to see where this goes.
yeah,
And then my name is Stephen Burdett. I'm 20. So my parents grew up in like drug-related homes, and then they got saved and became missionaries to Thailand. I was born kind of a little bit before that. And so I grew up in a pretty strong Christian home. Like my parents were always really, if the Bible said it, we were going to do it. So growing up in that kind of atmosphere, I've always been oriented more towards the Bible says go and tell all the nations. So let's do that. And so, yeah, that's who I am. I've been saved, truly saved for 4 years now. And growing up in a Christian home, I always thought I was fine. Like, it was just another day. And then I realized it clicked one time when I was about 16. Oh man, I have not accepted the death, burial, and resurrection and made it personal. So I got that straightened out. And then life got a little harder, a little more spiritual persecution. But I can't hold you down forever. So now I'm trying to live it out a little bit more. Evangelize, disciple. And that's where I'm at.
awesome, awesome guys. So kind of the purpose of this episode is talk about your witnessing trip you guys just did because you guys were actually both of them there, and I was kind of a little bit jealous that you guys actually got to meet each other. That was like one thing I'm like, dang it, like I would do anything just to be there to get to meet y'all. But
It was great. It was great.
so yeah, so you guys like posted a couple of journal entries on our community about the witnessing trip, and then right there, I'm like, that's a podcast episode that we can do, just talking about the trip and how God worked through y'all through that trip. So you guys got any like stories you want to tell, or how God worked through that trip that you guys want to tell us about? So.
Let me start by saying a couple things first about the people who were hosting the event. So I found out about it because I've followed their ministry for a number of years, long time. It was the Malley family. Their ministry is Tomorrow Forefathers. They're pretty well known for their Bright Lights ministry, their book Making Brothers and Sisters Best Friends, other things like that. So I've known about their family for a long time, about the books they've written. And they have a study for young men called Light Shop. That had a huge influence in my life, even down to my testimony, in me actually becoming a Christian. And then Grace Malley's book on evangelism, that was the tipping point between me knowing how to share my faith and then actually sharing my faith, was that book. So, two very key moments in any Christian's life, these people had a huge influence in that area. So when I saw they were doing this, I was like, okay, first of all, I really want to meet these people because I've never met them. And you should meet people who have a huge influence in your life. And then I thought, you know what? I'm not super enthusiastic about sharing my faith. I know how. I do it from time to time. I'll pass some tracts out. But I'm not on fire for sharing the gospel. And I was like, I want to go and I want to glean off of what these people, their enthusiasm, how they live their life. I just want to go and be with them in person and see what that's like. So I heard about it through their email, and then I posted about it on the community. That's how Stephen found out about it. He's like, hey, I'm coming too. I'm like, yeah, let's do this. So just to open with that. But yeah, different things from the event. Stephen, you go first.
So I'll let Clayton share more about the stories from when we were at the event. But coming home from the event, I got caught in a blizzard for like 3 hours straight as I was driving back. And I pulled over at a rest stop because I was on the very, very, very emptiest part of my gas tank in a blizzard on the highway.
That's not good. That's not good.
It was not good, but it was all right. And then I stopped at a rest stop on my way back. And as you would imagine, the entire thing was packed with people. So after just coming back from this witnessing weekend, still on my way back, I pulled out some tracts. I think I gave out, I think it was like 23. I want to say it was like 40, but I don't think it was. Because there was a lot of people that would blow you off because they were stressed out. It's a blizzard. And there's a lot of people that were like, you know what? I need something to read. So there's two different ways to evangelize. There's tracts, and then there's like word of mouth. And in this instance, I use tracts because you're still sharing the gospel either way. Evangelism isn't necessarily about standing on a box and yelling at people that they need to repent. It can be just as much handing out a tract or talking to someone in a general conversation. But after that, of just mostly giving out tracts because no one was in the mood to talk, I went home, a few days passed, and I went out to the park to practice. And I was really nervous. I was like petrified. I sat in my car for like half an hour, and this is very unlike me. Like, I'm a go-get-'em kind of person. But no matter how many bad things I imagined, none of them happened. Like, you went up and I talked to this girl that was roller skating, and she was like, oh yeah, sure, I'll take one of those, and we talked for a little bit. And then I left. And then there was another guy watching the baseball game that was going on. So I walked up to him. We talked for a while. He was a Christian. It was awesome. Like, and then I talked to another guy at the bench. He wanted to get into conversation about evolution, which I wasn't a fan of. And I could not get the gospel to this guy. But I tried. As bad as you think it's going to go, as petrified as you think you're going to be of sharing the faith, it's not going to go that bad. Even if you absolutely butcher it, like, so what? Nothing's going to happen. So you can have a lot of really cool conversations. And the coolest part about witnessing is a story that I won't be able to tell yet. Because no matter how many witnessing stories we do, we don't really know how many people get saved. The coolest stories that we'll be able to share is when we get to heaven and we really meet the people that we actually impacted. That'll be my favorite story. So Clayton, stories from the event.
Okay, so let's see where to start. So first, these people are super laid back and chill. They're humble. They are godly, Christ-like, and it flows over into your life. I know that's what I was kind of going to get, was to glean off of that. It was fantastic. So just throughout the whole weekend, but they broke it up into different sessions where we would watch a video, Josiah Moffat and Grace Moffat Malley. She got married, so now she's a Moffat. They would share stories that they've had from their past of sharing the gospel with people as encouragement, and then also practical training. Okay, what are some questions that might come up? How do you go about walking somebody through the gospel? How do you initiate a conversation? How do you overcome your fears? All of these things is what they were talking about. There was lots of discussion. There were six of us there total as attendees, students, and we got to role play together. We got to talk about, hey, what would you do in such and such situation? How would you handle this? So it was so cool. Stephen and I were probably I think out of the students, we were the only ones who had done a lot of evangelism before. The others, this was like their first time going out and doing it. And so, speaking of petrified, I mean, some of them were petrified. Like it was very nerve-wracking for a lot of people the first time. I mean, when I started doing it back when I was 14 or so, my knees would shake. I'd walk up to somebody and my knees and my hands are shaking. It's like, it's absolutely terrifying. And it was so cool to see the transformation of the other people who had never done it before as they go from not knowing a whole lot and being terrified to going to the mall and putting it into practice. It was so cool to see. That was one of my favorite parts. And then at the mall, probably my favorite story of talking with people was there was a group of 3 guys at a bench and in the food court area. Stephen and I were like, well, let's go talk to him. So we go up to the bench. We're like, hey, we're going around asking people some interesting questions, and we're wondering if we could ask you some. They're like, yeah, sure. We said, did you have any sort of religious or spiritual upbringing? And one said he was a Methodist. The other one was a evangelical. I'm probably getting this wrong.
Evangelical. Okay. He was more of a conservative.
Okay. And the other one was an atheist. I'm like, whoa, this is a great group of people to talk to, you know? So we mainly interacted with the atheist. I said, what's the biggest thing that comes to mind for why Christianity couldn't be true? He sits there for a few seconds. He starts to look a little bit embarrassed, it seemed like. He's like, well, the first thing that comes to mind would be that religious people use their religion to implement laws. I'm like, okay, give me an example. He's like, well, abortion. He's like, abortion should be legal. I'm like, ooh, I don't want to go down that road. It's just going to be a rabbit trail from the gospel. It's like, oh, okay. And then I said, what's the biggest reason you've ever been given for why Christianity is true or why a God must exist? He sat for a couple of seconds. He's like, I can't think of any. I've had this happen with multiple people. It wasn't just this one-time event where you talk with somebody and you ask them, what's the biggest reason you've heard? They have no reason for what they believe, and they have no reason for why they shouldn't believe in Christianity. Logical reasons. They may say like, oh, well, such and such happened, which is to some extent a valid reason. But a lot of times when you're talking to them, they really don't know why they believe what they believe. They just don't like, say, Christians because Christians, you know, sometimes we do act wrongly, but also because they don't like what it means they're going to have to do with their life. So we had these tracts that Grace wrote called Evidence for the Resurrection of Jesus Christ. So this is like the perfect thing because it talks about why Jesus Christ was a real person and why his resurrection should be believed in. So we were able to give them all those. I know we talked with them a little bit more. I can't remember too much more of the conversation, but that was probably my favorite one. I think out of our whole group, there were probably, 12 of us? We talked to 60 people because the Malleys had the Moffats had some other friends come with them as well. So that would probably be my favorite evangelism story from it. That was really neat.
Yes, that was enjoyable. Clayton did most of the talking in that one. Also, huge shout out to the Malleys and the Moffats. We stayed at their house, and it was absolutely awesome. So if
they're really good at cooking. They're really, really good at cooking.
Oh yes, the food was phenomenal. So big shout out to them.
Yeah. And something else I want to add on in terms of fearing sharing the gospel, because even for me, that's the number one reason I don't talk with people. It's not because I don't know enough. That's not what comes to mind. It's not like, oh, I'm not going to be able to explain it well enough. Like, no, I know I can say what I'm thinking. It's just fear, the fear of man. It's awkward. It's uncomfortable, especially if you think it's awkward and uncomfortable. That always stays with you. It's always there. Even before going to the mall with everybody, I was not willing to go. As soon as I get started, the whole thing changes. I'm like, let's do this. I'm in it. Let's go. On the way back home, as I'm driving back home, stopping at gas stations, I think, oh, I should hand out tracts. And my brain goes, no, that's terrifying. You don't want to do that. Right. So even after being in a spiritually charged environment like that, where it totally impacts your life, there is still the fear. It's still there. This past week, I had some extra time. I would go to the park to talk with people, hand out tracts. I'm terrified. Once again, once I actually get started, the fear mostly goes away. It's a lot better. I'm more relaxed about it. And then you get to hand out tracts to people who are like, oh, I used to have a Satanist flag hanging in my house. Things like that. I mean, you run into all sorts of people. Like, these people need the gospel, Right. You run into people who are like, oh, you don't want to know what I believe, or, oh, nope, I'm not interested. You get a huge variety of people, and some of the conversations are fascinating. I can share a story of an evangelism encounter I had after the weekend, but I don't know if you want to. I can do that now or later.
We can do it a little bit later, but
okay.
Stephen wants to say something, so we'll go.
We are on the stories section, so
the stories section. I love stories.
Yes. So another thing to add on to having fear of evangelism, I don't think it goes away. Like,
Mm-hmm.
even guys that have been witnessing for 50 years, they still are afraid to do it sometimes. Like, it is something that does resolve itself slowly as you practice, because you get less afraid for logical reasons as you go.
Right.
But you can't, even if you've been witnessing as a strong person, a strong evangelist for 20 years, you're still not going to want to do it sometimes. So I would highly, highly advise if you can get a second person to go with you and make that the reason why you go,
Mm-hmm.
it
Mm-hmm.
changes everything. Because for me and Clayton, if we were in the mall by ourselves, just to go to the mall, it would have been a lot harder.
Mm-hmm.
But because we had someone there with us to, like, man, I don't want to do this. And it's like, all right, go, I'll do the talking. Guess it worked fantastic. Or it was like, man, should we start with these guys? I don't know. And I was like, you know what? Let's do it. Like, having someone there to push you along, having someone there to pick you up, having someone to encourage you. Like, there's a reason Jesus sent the disciples out 2 by 2.
Mm-hmm.
He had a plan for that. It was so they could pick each other up.
Yeah.
Stephen and I, we were sitting in the mall. I think it was, I don't know if it was the first conversation we had with people or partway in, and I'm standing there and my flesh is like, no, you don't want to go talk to people. And Steve and I are talking, and he's like, well, you know what I say? Send it. And he starts charging off to the next group of people, and the inside of me is going, wait, It's like, well, there goes Stephen. I guess I have to follow him. So off I go.
Oh, my insides are doing that too.
So yeah, having other people is super helpful. Which on that note, the Malleys are doing another event, their annual Testify event. I think 100 people per weekend. Something big. They have people from Living Waters speaking Answers in Genesis, and that's in August. So if you want training, if you want to go out with other people to the Iowa State Fair, if you can make it over there, I'm planning on going to the second week. Make it over there if you can. Anyways.
Yeah, go meet Clayton. He's awesome.
The Malleys. It's to meet the Malleys.
Yeah.
Meet all 8 of them. It's great.
And I think the biggest part of the fear is because it's such a spiritual battle in the first place, trying to go from that state to the state where you can actually see God working, even though it may not be much, but it's such a spiritual battle just in the first place. Just even wanting to share, it's like these people aren't even killing you, but you're scared to death because of what they might think of you, because we live in a world where people just have to think about what other people think about them. But us as Christians, we shouldn't care what we think, but care what God thinks of us. So it's just important to remember that when we're doing the witnessing or anything, things like that we know first as a spiritual battle, and and let God work through us and not us try to do all the working, because in reality it's God doing all the working instead of us. So.
Yes. So I go out witnessing with a group of guys down in Gettysburg every Friday. And the first thing we always do, we pray. We recognize that this isn't us doing it. Even if we were the most advanced, had all the tactics and all the brains and all the this and that, if God isn't moving, we're not getting anywhere. So pray first. Make sure that you're blessed on the way out.
That's so huge to remember too, because I think one of the reasons I was so petrified when I was starting, down to the shaking knees, is because when I started, it was like, I can do this. I've watched enough of Ray Comfort. I know my arguments. I've studied the 7 major religions of the world. I can do this. I can argue anybody into the gospel. No, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers of the air. Like, it's not about me, and you don't argue people into the kingdom. And so as I've grown in that area, and as God has dealt with my pride more and more, it's humble. And like, if I can be humble, and if I can go, I'm just here to preach Jesus Christ and him crucified. I'm not trying to win an intellectual debate. Oh, it makes a world of difference. Makes such a world of difference when your focus is on Jesus. Like, in every way possible, if you can get that down, it changes everything.
Right. So I love these stories. So what are like some main takeaways from this event that you guys like learned, or you can tell other Christians, like, just about this trip or just witnessing in general? Like, what are some main takeaways that we as Christians can take from this and try to implement in our lives so that when we go to people and we work with other people, we're building one another up so that we can go witness to other people.
So the biggest takeaway for me was having an approach. See, it was me, Clayton, and then 4 other girls there. And like Clayton said, these 4 girls, they didn't really have a background in evangelism. They didn't really know how it was done. So when it was time to do like the role playing and try to really put what we learned into practice before we actually went to the mall and did it, these girls struggled, man. Like it's because they didn't have an approach. It wasn't their fault at all. The approach just wasn't the main, like sharing the gospel is the main focus. But how you go from meeting a random stranger to the gospel is extremely important because it gives you a road to travel. Even if they knock you off or something distracting happens, you can get back on. So an example of that would be like a survey. That's what we did. Me and Clayton, we had a survey. What is your religious upbringing? And then that immediately gets you into a religious topic and into a conversation where there's no surprises.
And it's not an attacking question. You're asking, hey, tell me about your spiritual beliefs. There's nothing attacking about that. And some people are still going to turn you down. That's the way it goes.
So yeah, having an approach is vital. Because if you what's your favorite flavor of ice cream? I mean, there are ways to bring the gospel into that, but it's not the best. So if you're really trying to get started in evangelism, that would be the biggest thing I would recommend. Find an approach. Find something where it's your style. Because like the girls, they were all kind of soft-spoken. They're not like me. Like I'll go up to people and be like, hey guys, you want to... And then, do something random. Like I was already preparing to get kicked out of the mall by security guards. Like that was on my mind.
We make jokes about Stephen trying to get kicked out of malls. I mean, he's that type of guy.
So having an approach that suits you is great too. You don't just because it works great for Ray Comfort to ask them what do you think's in the afterlife. That doesn't mean it's going to work for you. So find an approach, try to stick to it, and if it doesn't work, well, pray more. But if it still doesn't work, find another one. Find something you like. Find something that will keep you on track and keep you motivated. Because if it's not fun for you, the people you're talking to, they're going to feel it, and it's not going to be fun for them either.
Yeah. All right, Clayton, any takeaways?
I think one of the main things that I came away with was a Jesus Christ focused life, a life that is fully focused on the gospel. Because when you spend 4 days where you're focused on that, and when you're around people who are in the ministry, and they're not all in full-time ministry, but who this is so much on their mind. Talking with Harold Malley, him and his wife just got back from a road trip, and they're just bubbling over with all the evangelism stories that they can tell from the trip that they just had. They're like, oh yeah, we got to talk to such and such a person, and they responded in such and such a way, and we ran into this person. Like, you'd think that they were actually living for the gospel, and like that's what mattered. Well, maybe because it does, And so being around these people and getting the teaching and going out and doing it, and then having a 6-hour car drive home to think about it and talk about it with people on the phone. When I got back, it helps because my mom and little brother weren't at home. They were in Colorado, and it's much easier to be a Christian when you're single, to be spiritual when you're single.
Right.
You're not living with other people who you have to give your time to them, so on and so forth. So for the first week when I got home, it was just me. And so I had more time to myself, and my thoughts were my own. It was so much easier. And so my spare thoughts, it was on the gospel. I'm thinking, how can I make a difference for the gospel? Checkbox Christianity. So often we feel like, oh, I checked my box of evangelism for the day.
Right.
Oh, I read my Bible for the day. No. That is not how that works. It's all of our life must be about the gospel. Again, not so that we're earning salvation, but all of life is about the gospel. And am I living like that? Am I living as if Jesus Christ is the most important person? I will stand before him one day, and I will give an account for what I've done. and then will be rewarded for what I have done. Again, not in terms of salvation, but the Bible does talk about rewards, you know. Whoever gives a cup of cold water to a little one in my name will by no means lose the reward. You know, Jesus said that. Whoever prays in secret, my Father who sees in secret will reward you. These are the things Jesus was talking about. So there are rewards for what we do. And am I living? Am I running? Am I running for that finish line? And when I fall down, am I getting back up? So the first week after witnessing weekend, my heart, it had a new beat to it. It was beating to the tune of the gospel instead of to the tune of Clayton. Huge difference. And to some extent, it stuck with me. You know how you go to like some conference or event and then it's like, oh, you know, it dies after a week. Well, in some sense it does. But I also got a dose of truth. I also got to see and taste what it's like to live more focused on the gospel. And, oh, wow, it just makes such a difference. It makes such a difference that you're really hungry for it and you don't want to let it go, and so you keep going. And so that's what I've been doing. I've been continuing to grow. I've been continuing to press on towards Jesus Christ. I'm imperfect. I fall. I fail. But if I can keep going and keep going, it just gets better. In God's presence, there is fullness of joy. And so that's what I'm willing to pursue. To live as Christ, to die as gain.
And yeah, so there's like this song. It's called "Christ and Hope in Life and Death" by Keith and Kristen Getty, and it's just a helpful reminder that even what we're going through, or what the same, you know, that Christ is our hope, no matter what happens. So if we just cling to that more than our selfish desires and all of that, will slowly start to fade away because Christ is working through us. So yeah, and so there was like Secret Church that happened last night. It's like this like event that David Platt does. Is like it happens all around the world, and my mom was telling me a story from the event that there are some people who in like, I forget where, it could be like it's Afghanistan, and you know how like the Taliban is now taken over, and they're and if you're like a Christian there, you're gonna get killed on sight. Like it's if once they find you out that you're a Christian. So there's some people who would throw like Christian books into a well because they're afraid if people find out that they're a Christian that they're gonna die, and stuff like that. And or there's like some people who they would like do like special meetup because there's like a certain time that you have to be by the house, like you can't go anywhere. It's like some sort of like religious type of a thing there, and one person will go out and go to like a cave to get a Bible that they have hidden there, come back, and they will study the Bible for hours, like hours and hours upon end. And then once they're done, they put the Bible back, and you don't know when they're gonna meet again. And so, like to this day, like how often do we read our Bible for hours and hours and hours, like upon end? Like it just
We don't.
shows
We don't.
we don't, and it just shows that we need to have that hunger, and we need to have that thirst for God's word. So yeah, so you guys talked about the witnessing and you know like the training other people. So how can we as like Christians like do better about witnessing the people? I'll just go first and just say I think it just comes down to training because it doesn't seem like when you as Christians in other churches, there's not like a whole lot of like witnessing training going on. Like
You're right.
it's like Bible study and then you have the worship service, and that's really and you have like Wednesday night groups or stuff like that. But there isn't like a whole lot of like witnessing training going on. And I think part of that is it's not necessarily the pastor problem. It's more the people don't want to witness. You know, it's not on their mind like, oh, I need to go witness to people. I need to go tell people about Jesus. So I think for me, that's the main point is that there's not a whole lot of witnessing training going on in churches because if every church had a training for witnessing, we can do a lot of great things with that. But since there isn't a whole lot of witnessing training going on, I think that's part of the reason. Obviously, it's not the full reason. There's more other reasons why, but that was one thing that I was thinking of. So, what do you guys have thoughts on for that?
You're so right. You're so right. Because what did Jesus say? The last thing he said before he went back to heaven: go into all the world and what? Make disciples. What does it mean to make disciples? It means to disciple people. Discipling people is not when the pastor gets up and preaches to everybody. That's not discipleship to the fullest extent. How dare we put all of the weight upon our pastor to train up everybody in the faith? No, it's our responsibility. The Great Commission is for everybody, Right. And so you're right. Discipleship, I think that is the biggest thing. And again, I had watched hundreds of Ray Comfort videos and had not shared my faith. Then I read Grace's book. And that book is so wonderful and is done in such a discipleship type way, if I could say it like that. It was the tipping point to why I actually went and shared my faith, because it feels like she's taking you along with her to share the gospel. So it's like, I don't know, virtual discipleship via book form. You could kind of put it that way. Or again, going to the witnessing weekend. So you're right, discipleship. And so for anybody listening to this podcast who knows how to share their faith and has done it, start bringing other people along. I recently, there was a parade in my town, sent out an email to my church. I said, hey, if anybody wants to come and share the gospel, let me know. We'll try and pair you up if you're more nervous with somebody who's done it more and is more experienced. If you are more experienced, we'd love to have you come. If you're not experienced, we'd love to have you come. Let's do this. It's discipleship in action. And about 10 people showed up. And it was great. We went and we talked to a bunch of people at the parade. And we're doing something again this upcoming weekend, after this next weekend. And so that's discipleship in action. My church is working on putting together, we're going to go through Grace Melly's book, and we're going to put into practice as we learn. Go out and hit the streets, go out, maybe go door to door, grocery stores, fairs, events, real discipleship. And so we're preparing for that. We're getting ready for it. And it's going to make a huge difference. 2 years ago, my pastor went through a series on evangelism. Did it change me a whole lot? Oh. Did it change a bunch of other people in the church? Not that I heard of. Not because his preaching was bad, not because the study we were going through was bad, but because, we're such stubborn goats. We're such stubborn sheep. We need that nudge. We need to kind of be pushed along or dragged along, have somebody pull us along. Right. So learn, but also depend, get other people who you can train if you're more advanced, or who can help train you. And lots of time in prayer. That's another huge, huge difference.
I would like to redefine evangelism, because the way that you and Clayton mentioned it, it's like training, you need training. Like it's a really technical process. It's not a technical process. You can have training that can really boost you to say, you can share the gospel in a way that isn't so harsh or isn't so confusing, or you can try to lead up to it like this. But really, sharing the gospel is easy as, you have a friend, your friend says something, you say, oh, well, my life has been changed by the gospel, by the Bible. Can I tell you about it? They're like, sure. And you're like, well, I don't really know a whole lot. But even if you think it's crazy, I think that Jesus lived on the earth. He lived a perfect life. He died for my sins on the cross. He was buried, and then he rose again. And that's what I believe. And I believe the Bible says we can have eternal life, and we can have a better life in this life. Something that really has purpose. That didn't take any training. I communicated everything that I believe in a really low-level, down-to-earth way. Because if I'm saved by the death, burial, and resurrection, and belief in that, I can tell somebody. Evangelism it's not rocket science. You can make it rocket science. You can try to infuse the wisdom of the world. And I used to work in sales for a little bit. You can talk somebody into a sale. But you can't talk somebody into the gospel. If they're going to listen, they're going to listen. And even if you butcher it, like my dad was evangelizing one time. He was talking to some guy at a grocery store. He butchered it absolutely awfully. I wasn't there, so this is a story that he's told me. But he butchered it. And you know what the person said? I really appreciate you trying. It's nice to see that there's somebody else out here that cares enough to where even if it's not perfect, that they will still try. And that means more to me than someone who knows a lot but won't say it. He got told that. He's a pastor. He butchered the gospel. And somebody said, you know what? It was the effort that counted. Like I've watched people evangelize, and it wasn't even the words they said. It was just how they said it. So evangelism doesn't need training, but you can benefit from training. So now that I'm off that caveat, I think the biggest takeaway is to have an example. Because the reason that a lot of churches in America and in general don't evangelize is because there's no examples. There's a reason new Christians share their faith more than the Christians who have been there for a long time. It's because the new Christians just got witnessed to. They've seen it in action, and they've seen the power in their lives. So just because of that example, they say, oh, there's something here. And they get in church and see nobody witnessing. And it's like, man. So even if you have a training and then nobody does it, moot point. You don't get anything. But if you have an example, if you have a buddy that's going to go out, or somebody, an older guy in the church, like, go for it. People will see that. There was me and an older guy go out at church. He's not old. He's probably going to listen to this and be like, you called me old? He's like 80, though, so it doesn't matter. He is kind of old. But we would pass out Bibles. We just grab a stack of Bibles, we'd go to the town square, and we pass out like 20 or 30 something. That wasn't rocket science. It just had an example. I went to this was before the witnessing weekend, but I wanted to share the gospel, and I told people about it, and he said, sure, let's do it. Mm-hmm. And then other people were like, you know what, can I do that with you? When are you guys going out? It's not because we trained them. It's not because we had a seminar. Mm-hmm. It's just because of an example. Somebody's doing something that the Bible says. They're going into making disciples, and then people say, oh, I can do that. That's not too bad. Mm-hmm. And you can train them while you're there, because we're told to make disciples. Training is very vital. That's what discipleship is. Taking what you know and giving it to them in a practical way and mentoring over them as you do it. So yeah, biggest takeaway, the gospel is not rocket science, but you need to actually do it to see the benefits of it.
And it's worth it. It's always worth it.
It is very worth it.
Yeah, we did this one story. I always thinking about this all the time because it just every time I think about it, it reminds me that God is real, and He's working. So there was this one trip that me, my mom, and my brother, we went to New Orleans to help out with a church plant down in New Orleans that from our church when we were living in Louisville at the time. And
you broke up a little bit. Can you go back? You and your mom were...
So me, my mom, and my brother, we were on a trip to New Orleans for to plant a church there. And for the week leading up to that Sunday, for the first service, it was a bunch of witnessing events that we were trying to witness to people inside the neighborhood to try to get them to come to church or at least hear the gospel or something like that. And I remember sharing the gospel with a couple of kids that day, and I remember afterwards getting mad at myself because they didn't convert or anything like that. But then as I look back, I'm like, at least I started planting the seeds for them one day. So it doesn't matter if they truly convert in the Christian when you're witnessing. It could just be as simple as just planting the seed, so that it gets them in their mind starting thinking about God and the gospel and anything like that. And then on this last day of witnessing before the trip, it was supposed to rain that day, so all witnessing would have to be canceled or anything like that because due to the rain, and it will let be thunderstorm and stuff like that. So and I remember praying like for a couple of days before it was happened and stuff like that. And it didn't rain until we were done witnessing. And
Oh, that's awesome.
it was like, and me at the time, I was probably like an early teenager, but right then and there, I could just know that God was even more real. Even me as a Christian then, but I just knew right then and there that God is real. And then if we actually witness, He can actually do some great things that that we can't do. So it
To
was
take a
just
verse slightly,
incredible.
sorry, I was going to
What?
say to take a verse slightly out of context. You planted, God watered,
Right,
quite literally.
right, right. Yeah. I think about that, and I'm like, that would be like a great like movie to put it one day. You do like a wincing movie or something like that, and you just show God's power through that. So, anyways, so that's what I had to share.
And
So,
one thing that I've just noted is, do you know how many times we plant a church? Well, my family's kind of church planters, so that's kind of a when a new church is normally planted, they'll have witnessing and outreach,
right,
like really hard for the first 2 weeks, and then they'll just stop.
yeah,
You, what makes that's like going on a date for like, and then you get married, and then you just stop doing everything that attracted that person to you. If you're going to be a church and you're going to witness really hard for the first 2 weeks, what is stopping you from witnessing really hard for the next week, for the next rest of the church's life?
Because your
Like,
motivation is wrong. Like
because your
it's
motivation
like,
is wrong. You're trying to grow a church. You're not
right,
trying to evangelize to see souls pulled out of the fire. You're trying to do it so we can say, oh, our new church went from 0 to 20. Like, who cares? What we need to care about is the gospel.
right.
If we really want to evangelize and we want to see fruit from it, you can't just sow seeds for 2 weeks and expect to have a full harvest.
Right.
You have to be out there for
Working.
the entire time that it's time to plant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you guys got anything else to add or say before, we stop the recording button for this podcast, for this episode?
I do. So, even if you're really daunted by the idea of witnessing, I was talking to a friend and he said this. It doesn't matter how good you are. Even if I think it was actually Justin Moffat, Grace Moffat's husband. He said it doesn't matter how good you are when you start. It just matters that you want to. Because wanting to will, even if you fail the first time, even if you decide to go out witnessing and you don't, you just sit in your car the whole time. You just gained experience. Something happened. And you go out next time, you still sit in your car the whole time. And then you go out the next time, just because you want to. You're making an effort to do something. Sorry, the cat tried to jump on the desk and it was a bit bad. But just because you're making that effort, God will bless that. And the next time you go out, instead of sitting in your car, you get out and you walk around the park. And then you don't say anything, but you grew. And the next time you go out, you talk to one person. It's not about the gospel, but you grew. And then you go out the next time because you really want this. And then you talk to somebody about the gospel. They say no, you go home. You grew. And then the next time, because you really want this, it's not something where you're going to go out and God's going to say, I'm going to bless you with 1,000 people on your very first time witnessing. It doesn't work like that. Like me and the guys that go out on Friday afternoons to go to Gettysburg. Do you know how many people we've seen converted? 0. But you know what? We want it. We're trying. We've passed out thousands and thousands and thousands of tracts.
And that many seeds have been planted. And who knows?
And that many
the
seeds
day
have been
after you
planted.
witness to them, the water bird comes along and sprinkles some water on and something sprouts up.
Mm-hmm. Because it's not about how good we are. It's just about how good God is. And
Exactly.
if we really want to share his gospel, the power's not with us anyways. The power's with him.
Mm-hmm.
So we
Exactly.
just have to let God do what he does, and we have to want what God wants. God will bring the increase when he wants to, whether that's in your life as a person or whether that's actual souls.
Yep. Yep. May God increase and may I decrease.
Amen.
So yeah. Well, I just wanted to say thank you for you guys coming on for this episode. It was a good one. So I appreciate you guys taking your time being here, and well, I'm sure we'll do another episode about a different topic at some point again. But I just wanted to say thank you. So
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. It was great. Thanks for giving us the
Thank you for letting
opportunity
us
to
talk about something.
share our experiences. Yeah, it's great.
all right. Well, this is the podcast episode 9, I think. So, all right, guys, we'll see y'all later.